Evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight on a Friday evening at our webinar titled Discussing Environment Advocacy. The time is 7:55. We'll let our viewers stream in and we'll be starting in about 5 minutes. This webinar is streamed on both Facebook and YouTube, so you can tune in to either one of these platforms to watch this stream, whichever you prefer. See you later. Happy Friday, everyone. I hope your week has been lovely. Thank you for joining us tonight at our webinar titled Discussing Environment Advocacy. As per usual, this webinar is streamed on both Facebook and YouTube, so you can tune in to either one of these platforms to watch the stream. So, just some standard introduction on RIMA's webinar series before we begin. This is the fourth installment in our quarterly webinar series on advocacy that aims to look at, namely, the practices of advocacy in contemporary Singapore. So, since it's quarterly, with this fourth one, we're actually completing a year's cycle worth of webinars. So, let me just reflect a little on this journey. I think being on social media and seeing various advocacy spaces flourish in their own ways because of social media was very heartening to see. And one of the objectives of this webinar is recognizing current advocacy efforts. And this also means exploring what can advocacy look like. And turns out, as we've learned from our previous webinars, these may manifest differently, but every single one of these advocates was driven by their sense of purpose and their belief in the cause that they're advocating for. So when we started this series, I couldn't for the life of me imagine the panel of speakers I could have on here. I remember thinking, let's just be ambitious and see where that takes us. And I've got to say, one of my favorite parts so far has been rides back home with some of our speakers when they come to our office to do the webinar, when they share more with me about nuggets of wisdom and life experiences. But yes, in our previous webinars, we looked at advocacy in the Malay language and literature space. We also looked at it in the health space, and we also delved into orang laut advocacy. And through these presentations, we revisited a bit of history, and then the dialogues and Q&A sessions grounded the conversation into a more contemporary context of what our audience wanted to learn from our speakers. So tonight, we'll hear more from the environment space. I feel like personally I've come full circle because here with us today is Prof. Saidul Islam, who was my environmental sociology prof back in the days. And I'm more than happy to have him here to talk about environment from a religious but academic point of view. And I'm also very, very excited to have Mr. Kenny Lek from Pasafish SG. So if you don't know who they are, please go on Instagram and type in Pasafish SG. They do some very interesting stuff. And we have Mr. Kenny to share with us what he does in this particular advocacy space because I personally found it so interesting. So that's why I wanted to have him on here. And again, before we dive into the rest of the webinar, let's set some context to why we talk about environment today. So the environment is something that affects us all, and we can see this by how we complain about the climate in Singapore. Everyone says at least once a week that it's too hot or it's too humid. Uh, I am currently complaining about how it's too humid, but we fail to see how our actions may contribute to these changes. These conversations on environment are conversations we've been having since the dawn of time. Actually, I remember in primary six when it was like 2011 ish. I remember presenting on the 4 R's instead of the 3 R's in a competition with two other classmates. I think the fourth one was refuse. So it's reduce, reuse, recycle, and refuse. And I am excited to hear from our speakers if anything has changed since then. But for more context, Singapore has its own climate targets to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And some sources say that the new climate target that's set for 2035 puts the country on track to reach zero emissions by 2050. But while we hear from the top down, we also want to know what else can individuals like you and I do to forward this cause in our own individual ways. So we'll hear more from our speakers today. So how this webinar will go is that we'll have Prof. Saidul's presentation, followed by our advocate, Kenny, who is co-founder of Pasafish, followed by the dialogue, and followed by Q&A, where you can ask our speakers any questions that you have. The Slido is actually already active now, but at any point in the webinar, you can either send in your questions via the Slido or the comment section of either Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're streaming this on. So to formally, briefly introduce our speaker, Dr. Muhammad Saidul Islam is Associate Professor and Postgraduate Coordinator of Sociology at NTU Singapore. His research spans environmental sociology, international development, and Islam and politics. He has authored 8 books and over 40 scholarly works, including Islam and democracy in South Asia and climate change, and food security in Asia Pacific. So in 2015, he received the Canadian Sociological Association's Early Investigator Award. So without further ado, Prof. Saidul, please.
Okay. Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Uh, Moderator Izzati, my fellow panelist, Kenny Lake, guest, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I feel really honored to be here with all of you today to talk about something which is very, very significant and very, very much part of my heart, which is green faith cultivating environmental stewardship in Singapore. Uh, as we face existential threat because of some of the pressing problems we are facing today, especially climate change, ecological degradation, and biodiversity loss, it becomes absolutely clear that technological solutions are not enough. So we actually need, perhaps more urgently than before, uh, the moral and spiritual framework that can unite diverse communities in a shared sense of responsibility. So today I wish to present insights from Islamic perspective on environmental stewardship, focusing on how Islam's ethical and theological principles can contribute meaningfully to collectively ecological responsibility and social cohesion, especially in a pluralistic society and environmentally aware kind of country like Singapore. So, So, in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to focus on three things. One is the kind of environmental crisis we are facing. We don't have time to discuss everything, but I'll be just focusing on few. And then I'll be presenting Islamic ecological paradigm that is a very powerful framework to think about, and then how we can galvanize our stewardship in our own communities. So the first of all, let's talk about some of the crises that we're facing. The first one is definitely climate change, right? We all know that climate change is real and human beings are responsible for a substantial part of it. And this is a great problem that we are facing, and because of that, we are facing some kind of existential threat of this planet. And because of climate change, mass extinction of species might be happening very soon. The rich will find their world to be more expensive, inconvenient, uncomfortable, disrupted, and colorless. The poor will eventually die. So we might face some kind of polarizing trajectory in which the rich people will somehow manage to escape, but the poor people will languish in fumes, in toxic chemicals, in deadly diseases, mass suffering, and eventually die earlier. And also, along with that, food security is also very significant, especially for Singapore, right? Singapore is buying more than 90% of its food from 180 different sources. But somehow, because of the economic strength and not different kinds of policies, including, for example, diversification, Singapore managed to have higher level of food security. But in the world today, if you look at the world, every single year, the world is producing 356 kilograms of cereal per person. But at the same time, 40 million people are dying because of hunger. It's a very paradoxical. If we look at the world today, I think the amount of food that we have can feed more than, we have about 8 billion people today, but the food that we have can feed more than 20 billion people. But every single day, excuse me, more than 50,000 people are dying because of hunger and hunger related disease. So this is not a problem of scarcity. This is a problem of distribution. This is a structural problem and also the problem of access. Then we can talk about consumption pattern, right? Despite tremendous amount of productive forces and technological know-how, as well as breakthrough, we see that the current levels of consumptions are unsustainable, inequitable, and inaccessible to majority of the humans. And also, our crisis has something to do with modernity. And sometimes we have taken modernity without any kind of question. The thing is that there are two actually long-lasting impacts of modernity. One is that it has ruptured our relationship, long-lasting relationship with nature. Historically, human beings actually had good relationship with nature, but that is a thing of the past. And modernity actually has done that. And secondly, it also created an unprecedented alienation of human beings from God, who is basically the creator of this planet. So the thing is that there are some ethos of modernity. For example, unbridled freedom, unlimited consumption and greed. We have the power of science and technology, growth at any cost, even though sometimes at the cost of long-term sustainability. So these are some of the ethos of modernity, and this modernity is rupturing our long-lasting relationship with nature as well as God. So the problem is that if the same pattern of environmental problems and the growth continue for one more century, the whole planet will be totally unfit for living, right? So we are facing some kind of existential and really great problem But at the same time, the solutions are available. Delay is not an acceptable option. Reflexive modernity is perhaps one of the solutions that we can think of, and this is something that I'm going to talk today, hopefully. Okay, so in this precarious juncture, how to save this planet from an existential threat? And here, as I mentioned before, that technological solutions are important, but they are not enough. We need to have some kind of moral philosophy. An Islamic ecological paradigm can be a powerful paradigm to think about some of the solutions that we can do to avert the existential threat of this planet. So when you talk about Islamic ecological paradigm, there are some major doctrines. The first one is called the Tawhid. Tawhid is basically monotheism, oneness of God, unity of God with all creatures. The second one is Fitra. Fitra means basically the original state of human creation, and the original state of human in harmony with nature. But this is a thing of the past. Already we have antagonistic relationship with nature because of modernity and so on. But in Islamic doctrines, we need to have harmonious relationship with nature. And then we have Khalifa. This is a very powerful concept. Khalifa means stewardship. God has entrusted human beings with responsibility for creation. And we have to take the role of steward and to stop subjugating nature to itself. So it means, stewardship means that, we do not have the license for domination, but we have the responsibility to preserve this planet. And then we have amana. It means the fulfillment of this responsibility. We have a moral burden rooted not in power and authority over the creatures, but in accountability that only humankind has, towards God. And then we have ubudiyah, which is servitude. As servants of God, human beings have to obey laws, including the care for nature. And we have mizan, which is basically the balance, restoration of balance on earth, both ecological as well as social. Excuse me. So there are also other issues like adl, which is justice, ihsan, equity, and and priority. We also have wasata, which is basically the moderation. So in Islamic ecological paradigm, art is a kind of is the first mother. So human beings have right over the earth, and the earth has the right over the humans. But in the current capitalistic paradigm, we human beings are basically the boss of this planet. We have the power and capacity to pollute the environment, to destroy the nature. But we know that we need nature. Nature doesn't need us. But in Islamic paradigm, it's a very kind of harmonious relationship. Human beings have right over the earth, and the earth has the right over the humans. This is a very important thing. And by the way, earth in Arabic it is called ardun, and this ardun, this earth, this particular word came 485 times in the Quran, and you understand how important it is, that has been mentioned in the scripture of Islam. And charity to creature, for example, has rewards. All creature have similar rights over the nature. So we have right over the nature, and also nature has right over us. So we have to be responsible for every single action that we do. Just a few more things on Islamic ecological paradigm. We know that in this paradigm, preservation of water is a worship. This is not a simple kind of activity. This is a worship, a form of ibadah. And Islam forbids water pollution. If we pollute the water, then we have to be responsible to God. Islam also forbids air pollution, and we have to be accountable for it. But we also know that Islam endorses transformation of wilderness into agriculture and cattle pastures. So kindness to animal in Islam is an article of faith. Think about that. In 1,400 years back, people never thought about it. But and also in Islam, killing uh, animals for amusement is absolutely prohibited in Islam. I went to US and I found that there are a number of fox hunting clubs, which is absolutely prohibited in Islam. We cannot just kill animals out of amusement. Islam has a long and but some kind of forgotten tradition called RIMA, which is wildlife conservation. In the history of conservation, we can see it dates back to perhaps in 18th century in US with the writings of John Muir, Aldo Leopold, and so on. But Islam has a very very profound philosophy of RIMA conservation that dates back to 1,400 years back. In Islam, improving greenery is an essential obligation. It is so important that our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, when the doomsday comes, when the doomsday comes, if someone has a palm shot in his hand, he should plant it. So you understand how important it is to for greenery. So the question is, what makes environmentalism distinctively Islamic? The first of all, as a Khalifa, we are responsible for maintaining balance and harmony on this earth. And environmental protection and care for creation are seen as religious obligation. Okay, there are two things. One is the civic obligation, but in case of Muslim, this is also a religious obligation. Secondly, Islam emphasizes maintaining balance, mizan, in all aspects of life, including environment. The principle of moderation, which is wasatiyah, encourages Muslims to avoid excess and waste, aligning with sustainable environmental practices. Thirdly, Quran describes the nature as a sign, means ayah, God's creation, and we have to think about it. We have to research. We have to ponder over it. Tafakkaruna fi khalqi samawati wal ard means we have to research. We have to, ponder over the wonderful creations of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So the holistic view of nature as interconnected of all living things foster a deep respect for the environment as part of the divinely created system that must be protected. Number four, Islam strongly discourages wasteful israf, urging believers to use natural resources very, very responsibly. This extends to conserving water, food, and other resources, which directly supports environmental sustainable efforts. Number five, Islamic environmentalism is rooted in the concept of justice, adl, and trust, which is called amana. Muslims are accountable for the actions towards environment, and they are also required to uphold justice, ensuring that the natural world is protected for future generation. And this is exactly what is the definition of sustainable development is all about. Sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own need. And this is exactly what Islam is talking about. So the question is how we can initiate stewardship in our own communities, okay, and also advocacy in our own communities. And here I'm going to present three models. We call it the green Z's model. Okay, well, we call the green activism, which is jihad, which is green innovation ijtihad, and green lifestyle juhud, right? So in the precarious juncture and also the existential threat of this planet, so the ulema, especially the Muslim community, they can think of these three fundamental things in a very deeper manner. And by the way, in many places in the world, including Singapore, we have already seen a lot of examples. For example, I have been teaching, I used to teach in the US, and I found that there is a green Muslim or green iftar, green dinner. All these things are happening in Washington, D.C. Eco Halal in Chicago, Green Mosque, Adam Centers in Virginia in the United States. 50,000 families are involved in the whole process of, for example, solar panel, green food, green practices, recycling, and so on. Greenhouse was prescribed by Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences in UK. We also have Eco Warriors, Eco City in Bandung in Indonesia. Islamic Conservation Guide we can find in, for example, Zanzibar. So let me give you some of the examples of how we can, galvanize this stewardship. The first example is green reflexivity. And this is something which is part of Zuhud, green lifestyle. Now we can use commodities which are environmentally sound, socially responsible, and culturally friendly. Okay, and we have the spectrum, using from all the way from most preferable to least preferable. Okay, if you see in the picture. Then we have the saving water. Water is a very, very precious, commodity in Singapore, right? And there are plenty of ways in which we can save our water. For example, if everyone saves one glass of water while we are brushing our teeth, sometimes we brush our teeth and the tap is kind of on. So if we save our water, just one glass of water every day, we are basically saving 6 million glasses of water every single day. And it can become 180 million glasses of water in 1 month. So, and we're supposed to do exactly the same thing during ablution at the same time. The next example is food, okay? And this is also part of green lifestyle and green innovation ijtihad. Okay, overall in the world today, as I mentioned before that, we have enough food, but we are wasting a lot. At the same time, a lot of people are dying because of hunger. The problem is that currently about 30% food across the world is kind of getting wasted, even including Singapore. According to Singapore Environmental Council, 52 plates of nasi lemak per household is being wasted per year. So if we combine all the households together, we are basically wasting more than 75 million plates of nasi lemak every single year in this country. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran very clearly, وَلَا تُبَذِّرْ تَبْذِيرًا إِنَّ الْمُبَذِّرِينَ كَانُوا يَخْوَانَ الشَّيَاطِينَ وَكَانَ الشَّيْطَانُ لِرَبِّهِ كَفُورًا. Do not be wasteful. Indeed, the wasteful are brothers of the devil, and devils are always ungrateful to their Lord. So this is one of the places where we can work on. And then greening our families, transmit the personal green lifestyle to our family and then the wider society. And then there are a lot of ways in which we can do it, and I have just presented some of the guides here. And then how we can involve, okay, environmental activism. This is very, very significant, and this is also part of green activism jihad. Okay. By the way, when you talk about jihad, our mind think that perhaps I'm talking about holy war or something like that. Jihad is not like that. Okay, that might be part of it, but the actual the meaning of jihad is something different, right? I'm trying your best basically to to strive for the betterment of the whole society. Okay, so environmental activism is very, very significant. So in Singapore, what we can do, for example, we can involve with Singapore Environmental Council. FITRI is also one of the small, but it is a very effective organization. We can involve and make it effective. We can comply with government's green policies, and this is very significant. Perhaps we know that Singapore has, effectively transformed many environmental challenges into business opportunities. And Singapore has a very robust policy called Singapore Green Plan 2030. We also know that city in the garden or city in nature, sustainable living, green citizenry, that actually wasteless. So all these are some of the slogans that we have in Singapore, right? The green communities, green commutes, green energy, green building and infrastructure, cleaner energy and vehicle, sustainable aviation, sustainable maritime. We have green economy and resilient future. So all these are somehow part of the Green Plan 2030. And this is a very, very wonderful kind of thing that we can involve ourselves. If we can involve, this is not just kind of civic responsibility. As I mentioned, this is also part of our religious responsibility to involve and to move these policies forward. Okay, and then we can also join the water saving campaign of PUB. Okay, and then we can make solidarity with WWF in Singapore. They are doing a lot of works together. For example, removing plastics that is choking the plant, the oceans, and so on. They have a lot of wonderful campaigns. So we can also make solidarity with WWF in Singapore. Clean national parks as eco warriors. Within the Malay community, there is a wonderful kind of culture called gotong royong, some kind of self-help sort of thing, right? So the gotong royong, for example, can be extended to parks, and also preach, green khutbah or sermons, and that can be a wonderful method or great method of dawah, and this is already happening in Singapore. Okay, so. So the question is, what roles can religious leaders and communities can actually play? They can play a lot of roles. For example, being a moral authority and influence, they can shape values and behavior towards eco-friendly practices. Secondly, they can also do a lot of community mobilization, organize environmental campaigns, cleanup drives, tree plantation, conservation efforts. They can also encourage community-wide participation in sustainable practices, along with government and also other non-governmental organizations. And then number three, they can also integrate environmental teachings into sermons and education. This is exactly what is happening already in Singapore, and I'm really glad to tell that. And that can create a deeper spiritual connection to uh, to basically caring for this planet. Okay, and then advocacy for policy change. For example, their voices can lend significant weight to environmental movements, lobbying government and corporations to adopt more sustainable practices and policies, and also fostering interfaith cooperation. Environmental challenges are global, we all know that, and religious leaders can promote interfaith collaboration on issues such as climate change, pollution, and resource conservation. And this is also happening in Singapore at the same time. By working together across religious lines, communities can build broader, united front in addressing environmental issues, emphasizing the shared responsibility and protect this planet from an imminent existential threat. So, So in conclusion, we can find at least a few things. We need to get out of the shells, and we have to involve ourselves, in the environmental efforts, right? And we have to. The problem is that we have the Muslims have a very deep kind of tradition of environmental protection, but we are exhausting ourselves. We are exhausting ourselves basically, to do something else, but environment sometimes become is not a priority in our daily life. So that's why I think we need to be very careful on that. And the planet is facing an existential threat because of climate change and other environmental issues. And environmental protection is a core principle in Islam. This is a form of ibadah, right? But largely this is neglected in many societies. It is a timely kind of thing that we must involve ourselves. And Muslims need to form an ontological alliance with other communities for a sustainable planet. Okay, thank you for being with me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Okay. Waalaikumsalam, Prof. I think that was a very insightful presentation. Thank you. It took me back to uni for a bit. I've learned like Islamic ecological paradigm in his class, and thank you for sharing how we can contribute back from saving water to improving greenery and environmental activism. And we, as in not just individuals, but also religious leaders and communities. And how they can play a part also. So you mentioned so many ways of environmental stewardship, like you mentioned, and we'll hear more from Kenny. He's also doing some pretty good stuff that falls under this. But before that, a reminder to all our participants, if at any point in the webinar, if you have any burning questions, do make use of the QR code at the top right-hand corner of the screen to access our Slido and our comment sections, and we'll keep them for our Q&A session at the end. So our next speaker is Mr. Kenny Lake from Pasafish, and here's a bit of context before he begins. So Pasafish is a platform that focuses on outreach and research that's centered around the fish sold in Singapore's wet markets and supermarkets. So he combines concepts of environmental conservation and Singapore's seafood heritage together to promote the concept of sustainability and traceability in seafood supply chains. This is to ensure a future for our marine ecosystems. But at the same time, Pasafish aims to reconnect Singaporeans to our heritage and wet markets through a shared love of seafood. The Pasafish team conducts various activities from citizen science surveys to tours, which engages audience to create an affinity with our seafood heritage and ecosystems. So Kenny will explain this better than I will. So let's have Kenny share with us more about what Pasafish does in their space before we dive into a short dialogue. Kenny, please.
All right. Thank you, Izati. And thank you so much, Prof. Saidu, for that great presentation. So my name's Kenny. So I think we'll do something a little bit strange. Rather than introducing myself right up front, I'll talk a little bit on what we do and also to ask the audience some questions. So Izati had very kindly introduced us very well, actually much better than what I could have done. So in short, basically we preserve Singapore's seafood heritage, but we want it to do it in a very sustainable way. So maybe just to start off with a few questions to the audience, just have it in your mind and make use of the Q&A to post some questions out there as well. So when was the last time you went to a market? Let's say in the span of the past month. So just have a think about that. Then also, how many fishes can you actually name that we actually consume on a very regular basis? Or if you're not really sure, you can take some inspiration from the fishes you see in the photo. And then how have this relationship with our environment changed over the years? So with all these different modernizations and urbanizations, are we still able to forage for our stuff? How our resources and dependence on nature have changed over time as well. And also what ties our food place in this cultural heritage. So I'm sure everyone has some sort of relevance to seafood, whether it's in your youth, in your culture, even sometimes in religion as well. And last but not least, do you even know what fish this is? So this is a very common fish, but leading multiple and numerous tours, we have also noticed that while this is one of the most common eaten fishes in Singapore, but not everyone knows about this fish in its whole, so they cannot recognize this if it's not in a fillet or steak form. So I'm sure you have a quick ponder, and I will review the answer. So this is what we call as a narrow barred Spanish mackerel. As you can see, it has been used for many, many dishes. It could be done in soup, sliced fish porridge and noodles, fried fish, in curry, even in otak itself. So more commonly, this is actually named as batang or tenggiri batang, and this is something that we eat on such a regular basis. But unfortunately, this fish is so popular that we have been eaten to a stage of it nearly being threatened. So as per IUCN, it is actually currently near threatened. So they are moving down the line, becoming towards more endangered as we continue to rely on this particular fish for every single dish. So we aren't really saying that we don't eat fish, but this is just a reflection of what happened in the past and our present today. So our wet markets are just a fragment of the past. It used to be crowded. Everyone is there to buy groceries, especially on the weekend. But today we see very little people whenever we are there almost every single week. So we also have very limited diet. So if you can't recognize the fish just now and you can recognize this particular fish, that is kind of the things that we are talking about, because this is a salmon. And a lot of our diet have changed to what is popularized by different new media outlets and also business initiatives. So salmon is one of them, cod being the other. And then we are also from a position of being supported by our oceans to exploiting the oceans for a lot of resources to the point that it's no longer sustainable. And our diets have changed and recipes have become lost. So a lot of recipes grows very close to our hearts since we grew up with them. And this particular dish is actually laksa siklat, which I'm very sure over 95% of Singaporeans might not have heard about this dish before. Currently, we only know that this could be found in Geylang Serai market, but other than that, I really do not know where else can we get this particular dish. And last of all, we no longer understand what we are eating because all fishes generally comes in a very processed form, like fillets, just to appeal to the general consumer. So that begs the question, actually, of do we really understand the problems and also the extent of impacts of our current consumption? Because as we go on with certain things, we don't exactly know what types of environmental impact are we causing. Is there a way to do it sustainably? Is there a future even for a lot of our natural ecosystems itself? So I think in advocacy, that's something that we often brainstorm about and how we actually go about upfront. Right. So these are just some facts that I'll be spitting a little bit. So, just why we talk about, sustainable consumption and not just, totally stop eating certain products. So first of all, there's over 50 million people just in Asia that relies on fish to, earn a livelihood. And this includes your fishmongers, fish traders, importers, exporters, to maritime shippings, and even your local hawker centers and restaurateurs itself. And out of all of this, protein that we actually intake, we actually have 38% of it coming from seafood based in Southeast Asia statistics. And this is a huge amount because we have obviously more than 4 animal proteins. So this is much higher than a quarter of our animal protein intake. And just in Singapore, we consume 22 kilograms per person per year. That's the average of how much seafood we are eating. And this is slightly above the global average of 20 kilograms. And just to illustrate it a little bit further, out of the 12 Michelin recommended the hawker dishes, 7 of them have seafood ingredients. That could be your char kway teow, which has sea ham in it. It has your nasi lemak, which has your ikan kuning, ikan bilis in it, and so forth. So all of this has such a big reliance on seafood from our past as a fishing village to today. And that has caused a big problem because 1/3 of, or more recently, 40% of our fish stocks are actually overfished. So that makes us have to think, is there a way to make all this sustainable, whether it's a fishery or even our consumption, to continue feeding our world as such? So that's why at Pasafish we do something called monitoring and traceability. So the facts are, in Singapore, the last inventory of all different species sold in our markets was actually in 1996, or what we have found so far, by CIFTEC, who is unfortunately no longer operating in Singapore itself, but have moved their operations elsewhere. And the source of our food is actually from around our region. In fact, more than 50% is actually from three separate countries of our neighbors. So Malaysia being the first, Indonesia being second, and Vietnam being third. So most of our seafood, that plays a lot to the whole food security issues as well. But to feed us, there's a lot of different fishing methods that's being implemented, from your net fishing trawlers, which actually damages the environment in very drastic manners, and to a point where it's very difficult for them to recover, and as opposed to our the small scale fisheries in the past itself. So that's why we have to think a lot more on where our seafood actually comes from and what does sustainability means without impacting people's livelihood and also their nutritional needs. And so far, just to give a preview, we have found over 200, maybe even 250 species of fishes alone at Tekka Market. So we have conducted our survey for a year now, once every week, and we have categorized all the fishes that we have found into these 9 categories of tuna, mackerel, snappers, groupers, and so forth. So I'll touch on a little bit on the fishing methods itself. To feed us, in the past, we depend a lot on small scale fisheries. So the top left photo is actually from a place in Bali called Jembrana, where a lot of the traditional fishing methods are still being used and developed. And on the top right, we do see this boo trap, which is also very apparent in our past, which is basically a construction of palm or bamboo wood to actually trap fishes in. But we have since moved from there to, due to our increase in demand of seafood, so we have ventured out to the oceans, like you see on the bottom right, which is a trawler boat or ship, which actually is one of the biggest problems because it indiscriminately catches everything in its way, from corals to baby fishes to even pregnant fishes. So it doesn't have a chance to reproduce. And there's also aquaculture, where we have started rearing a lot of different fishes. While there's ways to do things sustainably, but there are also risks of, breeding invasive fishes, and also, just creating a lot of pollution if it is not treated well enough. So from all of this, we have the other angle to actually think about if we talk about livelihood, right? So that's the markets and the communities that depend on these locations to actually buy fishes. So this is actually the 3 big cultural markets of Singapore. So we have Geylang Serai on the top left, top right we have Tekka Center, and bottom right we have Chinatown Complex. So they each cater to their own variety of audiences, different ethnic groups. And of course, on the bottom left, we have the Jurong fishery ports, which all seafood basically lands in and then gets redistributed out across Singapore. So from all of these markets, why we have chosen the market as one of our topics of discussion is because of how these markets have created a lot of identity for Singapore, being a very racial harmony country. And at the very same time, we learn from each other. So, like, for example, what Prof. Saidu had mentioned and shared earlier on, a lot of these facts will not be learned if we do not have all these interactions, in a common place. And the markets was historically one of the places that we built a small community, meeting, neighbors all around the neighborhood, speaking of fishmongers itself, learning about, different types of dishes, different ways of doing things. And that's really how we grew as a nation in the past as well. And so from there, we also expand out a little bit in capturing languages in terms of fishes. So there are many, of course, a lot of ways that we can talk about fishes' names in Singapore, but predominantly we use dialect and also the Malay language to actually name fishes itself. Like what I mentioned just now, we have Batang, we have Papan, we have Tenggiri, Korea. And in Chinese and dialect, of course, we have other names for it. So we collect all this information so that it's a little bit more familiar to different audiences as well. And from there, we branch off into the culinary history of things. So we have tamban, or most of us call it sardines as well. And we also have ikan parang, because it looks like a parang knife. In Chinese, we call it sai to he, si tao yu. So all of these are actually used by different ethnic groups and communities in preparing it very differently. Like sardines, we have your lekor or your keropok made from sardines. But in the Western culture, you have your tin cans sardines with tomato sauce or just brined. And then ikan parang, in Chinese culture, we do a lot of soups with it, or even yu sheng, which we used to eat them raw in the past. And now Malaysia still is very actively using it for their otak-otats. So all of this culinary history plays a very big part. And we at Pasafish believe that all of these things comes together and helps us to learn. So that's why we are to further promote our messagings. We actually like to gather collaborators. So Pasafish, of course, is not just myself. So my name's Kenny once again, and I have my partner Elliot. Both of us run Pasafish, and we have started this with this ideology of how this, by caring more about our food, we also would be more likely and inclined to protect them. Henceforth, this was how Pasafish was born. And we split them into two main categories, but not in silos. But our research, which basically we do a lot of surveys in terms of what types of fishes are being sold in Singapore, how are they consumed, and how much quantity there are. And from all this data research, we actually try to spread them out in different outreach manners. So like Izati mentioned, we hold tours amongst many other things. So we believe in a way that advocacy doesn't work just because we want to talk in a single topic, but we create opportunities that draws people in, that allows us to share a lot of this information out there. So that's why we host a very wide variety of experiences, such as dining to market tours, where we bring people to the market. We host talks. You can see Elliot there dressed as a shrimp. And then we have art workshops to join art communities, booth activities for the general public, cooking workshops for homemakers or people trying to learn to cook, anglers for target fishing, how do you do it sustainably, research workshop to encourage the scientific mindsets, public engagements when corporates and the public would have us, fishery port tours, market hawkers, and also ecotourism. So all of these are actually methods of how we draw different crowds in with different interests, and that allows us to talk about different topics at the very same time to preach for more environmental sustainability. And from this, we have this theory of change, which we, funnily enough, coincides with our branding, FISH. So fostering appreciation, because we believe in, creating this appreciation for the food and the effort that goes behind it, and and henceforth will be more inclined to protect it in the future. Inquiry, the more questions we ask, the better we can do things as well. So we often try to find out more information about the different sources of food, how is it prepared, and from there we can suggest ways to preserve that as well. And we do it through a very science-backed manner. And from that science-backed manner, we conduct different research and citizen science programs to allow that to happen on a bigger scale. And we are, always looking forward for collaborations in terms of that. And last of all, holistic appetites, which is also a little bit of a controversial standpoint, because we believe in spreading our diets wide and in variety, just so that we eat many, many different types of fishes during their seasonality, and we don't strain out a single population or a single species of fish even. And that is a way that we believe that we can promote sustainability in a very doable way. And from there, we hope to do four things. So when we conduct our research, we do more surveys, interviewers with different people. And from there, we do outreach activities to translate all of this information to something a little bit that the public can digest with. And then hopefully that actually shifts their consumerism habits in everyday life. So in terms of the diets they have, and that will allow recovery of different fish stocks by having less stress on them. So that's a very quick snapshot of what Pasafish is all about and what we do at Pasafish. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And yeah, do follow us on Instagram. And if you're interested in joining our activities, we'll highly love to have you around as well. Yeah, and that will be the end of my slides at least.
Thank you, Kenny. Yep. If you want to follow them on Instagram, please do. It's at Pasafish SG. I was reflecting on your questions. I have to admit that I don't usually go to fish markets, but I was snorkeling in the waters of Semporna last week, and I have a newfound appreciation for the different types of fishes. I think that makes me reflect on how representation matters. Like I'm thinking about Finding Nemo and how we are able to identify like specific fishes from there, and therefore we have an affinity for them because we empathize, right? And you also mentioned like how limited diets that are mainly made of selected fishes when you mentioned salmon and cod. So I guess we have an affinity for these types of fish because of popular culture. And I think your point about identifying the problem is so valid. I think when we think about the environment, we as normal citizens usually think about it so like in a broad sense. But what you're doing is very niche on fishes and on markets. And I like that you don't just stop at just inventory tracking, but you also look at languages, identity, and culinary history. I think it all value adds, and it all seems very elaborate and extensive for a two-man team. So kudos to both of you. Yeah, yeah, thank you again to both our presenters for the very interesting presentations. You both shared two different sides of the same coin of environmentalism. So I just wanted to move to the dialogue session now. So,
Sure.
um,
Sounds good.
yep, okay. So my first question is actually to Kenny. When you first began Pasafish with your co-founder, what was the general reaction from those in your circle, and has it changed at all in the time that you have been helming Pasafish?
Yeah, I mean, great question. So I think when we first started out, it was just purely a passion project that we do on the side. We never really expect to go further than that.
Mm,
Yeah, even in our circle, they all thought we were kind of crazy because the scope is huge, and there's a fair reason why it hasn't been done till today. So I think there was, while there were some concerns whether it's feasible, we quickly gained quite a following and also interest in our work. So I think like this whole heritage plus sustainability was a very big part of how this came to be. And yeah, so it's evolved a lot to today. As you can see, we have so many different ways to kind of converse with our audiences as well. So yeah, we are just really thankful that it has grown consistently over the past year that we've been running this.
no. So you mentioned a lot about your audience, right? So since you started this platform, what has the feedback been like, and how do you measure your impact? And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's always the key point of every end goal of advocacy, where we want to measure if people actually learn things like that. So I think first and foremost is about repeatability. So whether people, after joining one event, are they coming back again to learn about different things? Because every single experience we curate content specifically, so you don't just get an overview, but you dive into different details each time. So I think the feedback generally has been really well. So far, I have not heard any complaints, so that's a good thing, I hope. Yeah, so I think like it also speaks a lot that there's a lot of new collaborators wanting to come on, whether they are hawkers, they are anglers, there are people from the research facilities. I think that's also another way that we measure, because it allows us to provide them a platform to actually talk about their stories as well.
Mm,
And just in a very generic manner, I think we often meet people that have went on our activities before, and when we talk to them, it's always very heartwarming to hear like they've been experimenting with fishes that might not be as sustainably caught, like we mentioned during our tours and all. They
mm,
have already seen switch their diets and try a few variety of things instead of depending back to their salmon and cod as well, which
mm.
is not even native.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds very encouraging. Um, so to Prof. Saidul, in the academic circles, what is your sensing, right, on the response that you receive about what you've advocated for in your academic writing? and how Islam actually highly encourages Muslims to be environmentalists.
Okay, great. Thank you for this question. In the academic circle, I have generally received very positive and thoughtful responses to my advocacy for integrating Islamic perspectives into environmental sociology. Even this morning, I had a talk in the Singapore College of Islamic Studies, and I also find a lot of discussion, enthusiasm, and also feedbacks and so on. So yeah, within the Muslim community, there are a lot of discussion happening these days. Especially the time is it's very important because we are facing a lot of serious environmental issues, and this
Mm,
is it's a kind of it's a burning sort of issue, and that's why this kind of paradigm is very significant. The scholars, I wrote article I published, and the scholars increasingly recognize that Islam, like many other traditions, offer a very rich ethical framework for environmental stewardship. And I developed IEP, Islamic ecological paradigm, in sociology, and I'm perhaps the first one to introduce this in
mm,
sociology. And perhaps you know that, being a student of sociology, Izati.
yeah.
Uh, within environmental sociology, there are a number of paradigms like deep ecology, new ecological paradigm, environmental justice paradigm, and so on. So along with all these different paradigms, now Islamic ecological paradigm is now recognized as one of the paradigms. Okay, and it is also taught in many universities across the world, which is very good.
Mm,
But many are also surprised, even within the Muslim community. They are surprised by how deeply rooted ecological values are in Islamic teaching, particularly through the concept of Khalifa,
mm,
Istorshi Mizan, which is balance, Maqasid al-Sharia, and so on. Okay. Which can all promote care for the earth as a moral and spiritual responsibility. So many Muslims within the Muslim community, even we can see that they are not aware of this very deep, tradition that is prevalent within Islam. So among the non-Muslim audience, the reaction has also been very encouraging,
mm,
largely marked by curiosity and appreciation. What I found is that many expressed the fact that the insights actually challenge the dominant stereotype and open up new pathways for interfaith dialogue. That
mm,
Islam actually offers some of the pathways for a sustainable future, and it also generates some kind of pathways as well as avenues for creating alliance with other faith traditions and other communities at the same time. So roughly, this is the reaction that I get.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I was also kind of wondering because my follow up question was what about the reaction from non Muslims? And you covered that because I remember sitting in environmental sociology class and I was wondering what my other classmates were thinking also about it. So thank you for elaborating. I think it's so
Did you
interesting.
have any feedback from them?
No, actually, I I never heard what they
Okay,
thought.
I can share one thing. In the College
Mm,
of William and Mary in Virginia, I found that I was actually invited to give a talk by a group of Muslims,
mm,
but they actually asked me to give a talk for non-Muslims. Okay,
ah,
I was told that there was this environmental group over there,
mm,
and the leader of the group was a non-Muslim, and he wanted to know about Islamic perspective on environmental protection. So
mm,
after my talk, I was really, surprised that nobody actually leave the place. Everybody was sitting down, and every one of them were telling each other that we heard something absolutely new.
mm,
Okay, even the leader of the environmental stewardship group over there, he suggested that there should be a kind of Muslim chapter in the university, to lead the environmental
mm,
activism within the campus. So actually, that was the starting point when I thought of writing an article on IEP.
mm.
Yeah, so that is basically the history behind IEP.
Okay,
It's an ecological paradigm.
thank you for
So
sharing that.
Yeah.
That sounds very interesting to know the context behind why you decided to share and create this new paradigm. Yeah. Sorry, Ken, you were saying something.
I know. I was just saying that it's really interesting because,
Yeah.
it's always something that we want to, spread the message and inspire
Mm,
people through different measures. So like even through religious kind of things, it's something really that I would have never thought about ever.
mm,
So yeah, it's so cool what you're doing, Prof. Saidu.
Thank you.
right. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about very encouraging things, but I'm sure in the course of your research and advocacy, you've had multiple discussions and collaborations with other advocates or academics on some of the challenges that you face when you talk about the environmental costs. So, what have you gathered from these discussions, and what do you think are some challenges that you face in advocating for the well-being of the environment?
You're asking me, right?
To both of you.
Okay,
Who
okay.
wants
Kenny,
to
you
start?
go first.
Oh boy. Uh, I might need a moment to think a little bit more about
Okay, no
this.
worries.
From Saidu, if you're ready, you can go for it
Okay,
first.
okay, okay. No problem. Yeah, yeah. So you can compliment later on. Okay, so definitely there are a lot of challenges in environment. First of all, environment is not something one thing, right? It's very
Mm,
complicated. It's very diverse. Different communities are facing different kinds of problems. One
mm,
kind of environmental problem is highlighted by the media, and that becomes the major problem, while the major other problems are not, taken away by the media, and that's why it may not be the problem. Okay, some communities they're facing other problems, so environmental problems become kind of secondary to them. So there are a lot of issues within environmental problems, so some of the major challenges I found is that economic priority is still dominating factor across the world.
mm,
So when you have the economy versus ecology, then people used to have prioritizing ecology economy over the ecology, right? And also within the kind of dominant paradigm that we have an environmental problem. They take the quick cash, even though that is at the expense of long-term sustainability, right?
mm,
So that is kind of human nature, right? We love money, and if there is an environmental problem, we have a tendency, okay, let us solve this problem later on. So we actually externalize environmental issues, to be solved later on, and
mm,
this is called externalization of environmental issues. So this is one of the problems that we are facing. Second challenge is the greed, right? We know that greed, if the world is enough for everybody's need, but not enough for one person's greed.
mm,
Unfortunately, the current economic perspective is continuously galvanizing and reinforcing greed, and that's why our lifestyle is based on not need but want, right? We have, and want is absolutely unbridled. It is absolutely limitless, right? But when you think about our need, then it can be very limited. So for environmental protection, actually, we need to rethink about our own need, rather than just leaving ourselves within the realm of unbridled greed. So that is also another thing. Sometimes I also find that there is a disconnection between awareness and action.
mm,
People, they are aware of environmental problems, but they do not know what kind of actions can actually bring some sort of positive changes. So this is also another thing. And also in case of climate change, I think another challenge is skepticism. I mean, there is a strong, very concerted group across the world. They are funded very well. They are creating skepticism about climate change. Do you believe that in America, 19% people, they believe that yes, okay, climate is changing, but human beings have nothing to do, right? This is what they believe. And 5% believe that climate change is not happening at all in America. And this is done because of a lot of fossil fuel industries, as well as some corporations. They are putting a lot of millions of dollars, to create climate skeptics. So this is also another challenge. So in this way, there are a lot of challenges. We can go on and on. And on.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
I can hear from Kenny.
exactly. I think I want to step back because I want to concise this, but yeah, you can concise it very well. I think like propaganda was like such a big thing from bigger corporations and all that. So in the past, when I was working with WWF, we have this particular internal theory, which we discuss amongst ourselves, which we call it like a circle of denial.
Mm,
So basically, our consumers will say, "Oh, we are just one person.
Mm,
Corporations and governments are so much bigger than us. They should be the one doing something." And then
mm,
when you talk to corporates, they're like, "Oh, but there's no laws against it, and the consumers aren't asking for it. Henceforth, we don't have to do anything about it." And then the government is like, "Oh yeah, but both businesses and consumers have not, actively pronounced that they want this thing for us to take actions and make it into legislation level." So like there's this always circle of denial where we are just like looking at each other and like, nah, it's not my problem. And I think like
mm,
that's very true.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think like that is a very big issue, and I think like just in terms of resource, I think there's a growing need of all these environmental agencies to kind of like step up and really take this kind of risk to do something. And Prof. Saidu had also proficiently mentioned how this whole economical factor still plays a part in terms of funding investments into the right directions of things. But I think I'll touch a little bit more on like the local side of things. I think like a lot of us, we want to kind of do something, but we are often also not equipped with the right kind of knowledge, and there's so much noise all around the medias around us currently. So what exactly can we do if there is like a step by step kind of thing? I think that will be a lot easier, but unfortunately for environmental causes it's just not that simple. And
Mm.
translating and communicating this has always been the number one challenge that I do believe in, whether it's for wildlife, for ecosystems, habitats, or even just in terms of sustainability and material use. That has remained the number one challenge in making it easy for the masses, yet not oversimplifying things.
Mm. Okay.
And also, I think one more thing I can add here, perhaps that can play also a role. In case of course, there are a lot of changes happening in Singapore, but in Singapore, the structure here is some kind of paternalistic. I mean, the people have wider trust on the government, that the government, if anything happens, government will take care of everything. So, and that is actually, leading or motivating people not to do actions, right?
Mm.
And people think that, well, if there is any environmental problem, the government will take care of everything. We don't need to worry about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is also another thing. But this is not the case. Everybody has to be very careful. You know, uh, we need to actively involve in environmental protection and also, a lot of other things. Okay.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure. I think like we just can't be on the extreme ends of either ends, whether it's for all these
Mm.
policies or even just personal actions. We
Hmm.
have to look at it in a very balanced way. That's the only way that we can spread it, correctly, and also not foregoing one or the other things that will harm one community or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I think that was quite extensive. We heard reasons from being from a more global scale, and then we also heard from a more local side of things. So, very interesting. Okay. Do you, do both of you see any shifts in the environmentally conscious habits of Singaporeans over the years? If you have.
I think, yes, definitely. There is a noticeable positive trend in Singapore.
Mm.
Okay, the good thing is that Singapore has tremendous amount of green policies, and Singapore can
Mm.
become a good example for many other nations to emulate. Honestly speaking, and Singapore is a very good example of state-led ecological modernization. So over the years, for example, increased eco-awareness, more residents are now understanding waste management, water
Mm.
conservation, because there are a lot of, campaign going on by the government agencies, right? Energy efficiency, for example. There are a
Mm.
lot of policy-driven changes, government initiatives like mandatory recycling, water pricing, all
Mm.
these are actually nudging consumer as well as corporate behavior, right? That is
Mm.
happening in this country, and also the growth of eco culture, which is also
Mm.
very important, right? For example, sustainable dining. Now we are learning about sustainable fishing. Okay,
Mm.
so these are kind of becoming increasingly part of our own vocabulary, right? Zero waste stories stores. We have the community recycling effort and so on and so forth. So I think the deeper and more lasting impact actually require continuous education, number one. Secondly, policy innovation, as well as infrastructural development, and this is how
Mm.
we can bring a lot of positive changes in Singapore.
Mm.
Okay. So you mentioned a lot about the government's initiatives in
Yeah.
terms of policies and infrastructures. But I'm also interested to know from Kenny, maybe you see any like shifts in the advocacy space specifically about the environment?
I think for sure. I think 10 years ago when I first started in the scene, it
Mm.
was basically when you say sustainability or conservation, no one really knew what it meant. It
Mm.
was just not a keyword in the past. And now basically everyone is kind of talking about it.
Mm.
So like what Prof. Saidu has rightfully mentioned, there's a lot of this initiatives going out there that really helped the drive in this. So I think people are just really conscious about what they do, whether it's by choice or whether they are forced to. I think it's just there, and it has become a keyword, which
Mm,
I think it's fantastic that people are more aware of the problems that we have and the implications of what our actions actually incur. But there's also another flip side to it, which is a lot of potential greenwashing that might happen. So things that we
mm,
potentially say, oh, yeah, it's eco-conscious, it's eco-friendly, it's sustainable, and things like that. So I think like that's only something that we have to be a little bit more cautious about once that this word has been such popularized and also just in very generically placed. So
mm,
what does eco really mean? What does good for the environment actually means? What is sustainable fishing actually? So
mm,
yeah, I think we don't. I think nobody really has a full answer to this, but we all have bits and pieces that we do consume, and
mm,
yeah, as a consumer, I think that's where the shift happens. It's more
mm,
popularized, but it's also a little
mm,
bit more erratic.
mm. Understand. I think people are increasingly questioning these things like greenwashing and whether businesses are really like up to date with their eco practices that they claim. Okay. Okay, let's go into a discourse on trends. So we have to talk about AI, right? Since it's a big thing now. So among its criticisms is how it may numb critical thinking, intellectualism, and how it may be trained on content that was not consensually acquired by artists or content creators. But there's also an environmental aspect to it as well. So, for example, I've read that AI models are large consumers of water. So, is AI really a threat to the environment, or is it more of a boogeyman than anything? This question is to Prof. Saidu.
Okay. Anyway, thank you so much for raising this important issue. This is one of the topics that people are now discussing.
Hmm.
Uh, yes, I think it is true that it is AI has some environmental impact. For example, use of energy, water, and so on. But at the same time, while it is not the biggest polluter, it is certainly not negligible either, right?
Mm, mm,
So I shouldn't call it a mere boogeyman. Its environmental footprint is real and growing, by the way.
mm,
So what perhaps we can do, technology, we alone cannot do anything. It actually depends on how we are using, right?
mm,
So I think we need to use AI, in a very effective and sustainable manner, and we need to understand that.
mhm,
For example, it can help optimize energy systems. It can
mm,
reduce food waste. It can also improve, climate modeling and so on. So there are, possible pathways in which we can use AI, and this is perhaps the way forward. We cannot totally discard it. We have to live with it, but we have to make it kind of sustainable. So this is something that perhaps what should I say? That-
okay. Okay. Interesting. Um, okay. Moving on from AI, if Kenny has anything to add for this one.
I think just on the sustainability effect is
Mm,
always already there, but yeah, just in terms of like what Pasafish does with AI, I think Google Lens is probably the main thing. But
mm,
again, that plays to our point of misinformation, because what you search might not be exactly what it is. So
mm,
yeah, I would just constantly urge people to just clarify their data a little bit
mm,
more and just find scientific sources as well, not just believing everything that you see.
mm. I think the research on AI is still ongoing also, so we'll just keep
yeah.
track of its environmental effects lah. Meanwhile, okay. So to Kenny, okay, this is the last question on this course. In many Singaporean households, it's often the older generation who decides what dishes are prepared and eaten, right? So, do you find like younger people are more interested in sustainable eating, even if they're not the ones deciding what's cooked at home?
Yeah, it's very true. I think that's kind of the trend that we have always grew up in. And I think the younger audiences are generally more concerned about sustainability just because, we hear it everywhere, and it's kind of like our future as well. That's what's going to happen to us. The impact will basically directly implicate us in many ways. So I think, yes, we do see the difference in that. However, you're right, there's a lot of older generations still controlling the menus and all of that, especially when the kid is slightly younger. But it's quite interesting because I think a lot of the knowledge that the older generation has, whether it's cultural, whether it's heritage, or just traditionally how things are done, there are actually a lot more sustainable ways, such as like growing their own things, and
Mm,
eating things just around the house. How do you utilize food waste? Like, a lot of the new age kind of things, we just get like fillets, but the older generation will have many methods to use the fish bones, the fish innards, and so
mm,
forth. So I think there is a difference in terms of one, and also really understanding how do you do certain things, and how do you utilize certain parts to combat like food waste that actually generates
mm,
environmental concerns as well. So yeah, I think it's a balance of both. We do see a difference in both, but yeah, we can't say which is better as well. So
mm.
it's gonna be perfect if we can marry the both together.
Okay, that's interesting. I never thought about how like maybe the older generation knows how to utilize the different parts of the fish more. Okay, since we are talking about being more sustainable, right? Prof. Saidul, how can we reconcile the growing awareness around environmental sustainability with modern consumption habits? Yeah, like the modern consumption habits that lean towards convenience, excess, or waste.
Okay, yeah, it's a very good question and also a very tough question at the same time.
Mm,
Because our consumptions have been shaped in such a way that it is not environmentally sustainable. But yes, there are a lot of ways. And also in my presentation, I mentioned that the current levels of consumption are unsustainable,
mm,
inequitable, and inaccessible to majority of the humans, right?
mm,
So consumption pattern is one of the major causes of climate change as well as other environmental problems. But yeah, that solutions are there. One solution is just going back to the traditional society, something we call the voluntary simplicity, which is kind
mm,
of weird, right? People, we
mm,
cannot just move them back to the jungles, traditional society, and so on, right? People may not be willing to do that, but I think there is a very smart solution, and perhaps you are familiar with is the whole notion of ecological modernization. And within ecological modernization, there is something called green consumerism or green
mm,
reflexivity, right? We need to educate ourselves basically to consume every single commodity which are environmentally sound, socially responsible, and culturally friendly, right? So that's why we need to educate ourselves. We need to inculcate some kind of environmental philosophy into our own mind, within ourselves, then with our family, with the society, right? And this is how we can bring new kind of practices, within our own, society as well. So this is how we can, reconcile between environmental consciousness and modern consumption habit. So this is the personal level, but on the kind of broader level, ecological modernization can be, implemented through, for example, green technologies. You have the green policies towards sustainability as well as green consumerism, right? Even in the supermarket itself, we need to bring green food and so on. And I think in Singapore, right, the government is in the right direction, bringing, for example, green plan and so on. Okay, to make sure that people are used to having some kind of reconciliation between environmental consciousness and modern consumption habit.
mm. Okay, thank you for sharing what we can do on a personal level and also on a government level. Okay,
One of the
so
things I think I should add is that we need to have some kind of lifestyle connection, right?
mm,
Because every single thing, for example, we're eating, we need to know from where it is coming,
mm,
right? Perhaps you know that there is something called hamburger connection, right? So
mm,
when we're eating burger, and we know that the bulk of the burger industries, it also caused deforestation in Amazon, right? So when you're eating burger, we are also contributing to deforestation in Amazon, right? So
mm,
we need to eat certain things, that do not have any environmental impact. Okay, so this is our choices are very, there are a lot of choices, and we have to choose the things that are not environmentally sustainable.
Mm.
That's why our consumption habit as well as our lifestyle connection need to be, inculcated.
I think that leads back to also what Kenny is doing with Pasafish, because
Yeah.
he's tracing the source of what we're eating, and I think that like really like ties in together very perfectly. Okay, thank you for sharing that. We'll move on to our Q and A. I'm seeing a lot of very interesting questions from our audience who have been watching us from earlier on. Okay, so our first question is to Kenny. In your view, what are the key elements that make an awareness program or workshop truly impactful in encouraging more sustainable behaviors?
Right. I think just having a successful workshop or tours or whatever. So the main thing is about knowledge retention, right? So because that we can build the content from there. To me, it's more about generating an interest in the particular topic more than delivering very exact facts in the workshop itself, because memory retention, by the time the event ends, usually you only remember like 10% or even less than that. So fun is actually a very big thing that we do. So we want to keep things light, keep things simple, and also relatable. So things I often, in a way, stop the participants wanting to learn more about their life, what they do, and things like that, so that we create like a very curated experience that relates to their work life, their home life, like if they have kids. So we put topics that they can very easily relate to in terms of their daily life. So I think like fun and relatability is the main thing to really build this awareness. And from there, they develop the interest and want to learn more. And that's where they'll actively seek for more information. And frankly, that's how my mom did it. Now she's obsessed about health and wellness as well. So that's where I believe that really gets people in.
Okay, so continued on from the question. So this person asked, based on your fish theory of change, how do you know when these efforts are successful?
So unfortunately, I don't think we are at a level that we can really measure the impact that we have created. So far, ours is all very anecdotal. When we meet people or by randomly, they will just like comment or like our messages. Yeah, so this kind of a little bit more casual interactions is how we actually base it on. But
Mm,
we do have like certain feedbacks and survey sessions after. That's where we see, if there's some sort of memory retention, how willing are they in making a change in their lifestyle. So
mm.
I think those are some of the things. And just in the future, we are hoping to come out with this traceability program and having the involvement of many different stakeholders, and we'll be able to draw certain measurements from there itself.
Okay, looking forward to that. We'll just keep a lookout on your IG, I guess.
Sounds good.
Okay. So, to Prof. Saidul, this person say thank you for your presentation. From your observations, do you think the Islamic community leaders are doing enough to promote environmental stewardship?
Oh, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, not. Even though in Singapore, we can see that there are a lot of green khutbah, okay, in
Mm,
which is happening, and they are also trying to, mobilize people for a lot of environmental activities and so on. And that's the reason why I was invited to give a talk in the college, new college, right? So I think it's fine. But in other places, I find that only a small portion of the community, they are doing their job. I think it is very very easy for the Muslims to do all these things, because this is part of their faith, right?
mm,
I mentioned that for Muslims, and this is a kind of dual R's. Dual R's means, this is one. First of all, this is a kind of civic responsibility to preserve the environment, right? uh, as a citizen of the country, I think you need to do that. But at the same time, this is also religious responsibility, and this is not
mm,
optional. This is for the kifaya, means it's very obligatory kind of responsibility. But the problem is that within Muslim community, first of all, they do not have much education. They are not aware of the fact that Islam has a very deep, profound tradition of environmental protection. Even many people do not know that that the whole notion of HIMA, for example, conservation,
mm,
when they are reading about conservation, we are reading in the 18th century conservation in US with Aldo Leopold, John Muir and many others, right? 18th century, just a couple of centuries back. But Islam, 1,400 years back, it has a very profound kind of culture or practice of hima conservation, right? Even for every single rituals and festivals, in Islam, they have, of course, along with transcendental connection with God, there is also environmental connection at the same time. Sometimes we do
Mm,
not aware of it. So yes, I think the answer to the question is that we actually exhausted ourselves with some other things, like prayer and many other things, but many other essential obligations like preserving the environment, this
mm,
is not part of our daily life or part of our activities, unfortunately. But I think but the good thing is that the tide is now changing. People are now
mm,
increasingly moving towards environmental stewardship. There are a lot of eco warriors within the Muslim community. A lot of examples are we can find across the world. I think yes, for a long period of time it was not happening, but now I think people are increasingly becoming more aware of it. And not only that they are doing, but at the same time they are also, because Islam also has some kind of ontological alliance with other environmental protection, and they can have
mm,
alliance with other communities at the same time. So that is also they are doing at the same time.
mm. I think it's very interesting you mentioned green khutbah because I remember last year during the Eid Adha khutbah, they talked about environment as well. So yeah, I think they're trying lah, but
Yeah,
definitely more can be done.
right.
Okay, so our next question is just now we talked about circle of denial, right? So this person was asking, sometimes I wonder, does what we do really matter, knowing that corporations waste and pollute at exponential, insanely high rates compared to individuals? And then the follow-up question is, do individuals really play? What role do individuals really play in environmental change compared to governments and corporations? Hmm.
Mm.
This question is open to the floor.
Sure, I can take the first step.
Okay,
Since I
sure.
could share that whole theory as well. Yeah, I think like we often underestimate the power of kind of consumers. Technically, everything is run by consumers. It's just a collective effort, and
Mm,
often we always compare ourselves into just a single entity. But through seminars like this, for example, Izati, Prof. Saidu here. So you see, we are already collecting more people joining the efforts, and there's something that we often talk about is just the power of each influence. So people around you starts being influenced, and it just spreads on and on. So although we often see ourselves as just individual, insignificant to corporations, but who knows who's around you, right? So I meet a lot of people starting off Pasafish, and we just randomly bump into high level decision makers that can
mm,
actually affect certain changes. So
mm,
at the end of the day, we are all humans, and in a way, we are all equal in terms of our words, our perspective, and our perception. So I think like it's really not just about one individual working, but really we are a part of a collective, and the only way to just band together is just being more outspoken about things,
mm,
really understanding a topic and making things together. So it's true. There's other like underlying factors and all of it, but we as a consumer, we get to choose what we valorize, what we place importance in, and just really spreading the message from there on. And once more than a majority concurs, that's how all these environmental policies started anyway.
mm.
We have seen a shift already, and we just have to keep going on with it.
Okay. So
Okay, great.
power of the masses, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I
Okay.
also have the similar kind of answer. I think we need to
Mm,
reinvent our power, right?
mm,
Yeah, the consumer has a huge power. In US, for example, if a corporation gets 100 phone call, the
mm,
corporation is bound to respond, and change the practices. So I think they have a huge power. I can give you an example of, the shrimp aquaculture where, I did my PhD on. This is a $180 billion global industry. And in
mm,
1980s, there are a lot of deforestation, violation, a lot of things actually happened with this aquaculture. So there are a lot of reports at the time. There are movements, locally. They also have alliance with the global organization, for example, Environmental Justice Foundation in UK and so on. And
mm,
because of this movement, eventually the global, actors, the global stakeholders who are involved in the whole process. Later on, Walmart, for example, Darden, Leon's, the big corporation, right? They committed to buy only certified seafood, the seafood which is
Mm,
environmentally sound and socially responsible. So you see the power of consumer, right? The entire $180 billion of global industry got changed because of that, right? So I think we shouldn't underestimate our power.
mm. Okay. So since just now, I think Kenny mentioned the consumer has power, right? So this person wants to know locally, is there any way we can track how this seafood is being caught? Let's say we went to a fish market. Would the fishmongers know if the fishes that they are selling are sustainably sourced? Mm,
Right. So that is actually one main reason why inquiry was part of our theory of
mm,
change, because the fishmonger does know where the fish is coming
mm,
from and how most of the time how they are being caught, because certain fishes are only caught by
mm,
nets, certain fishes can only be caught by line, like for example groupers. So there are a lot of different factors when I talk about
mm,
sustainability. I would say the fishmonger probably would not be too familiar with the topic of
mm,
sustainability, but they'll be able to give us hints to certain
mm,
things. So one way that we can actually push for something that's a little bit more sustainably sourced is actually choosing locally farmed
mm,
fishes. Just because we have stricter regulations for our aquaculture farms in Singapore, and just in general, all these stricter regulations also means that they have to look at their whole energy sources. They have to look at their feed, the water pollution that they might generally have, escapee fishes, and even just generally their operational energy usage as well. So I think that's one way that we can find out, and it's quite unfortunate because since Singapore import most of our seafood from overseas, that also means that we are playing with a lot of different laws and
mm,
regulations from different countries. And unfortunately, it's quite difficult, and that's the reason why nobody really wants to be in this
mm,
space at this current moment, just because we don't have enough data across our region, and also not enough people that is willing to actually do something a bit more
mm.
sustainable. So yeah, unfortunately, the answer is yes, they would know certain things, but no in terms of sustainability. And that is what Pasafish mission is, to build this kind of traceability so that we can inform based on what the
Mm.
fishmonger knows, and we'll be able to provide the information from there, whether it's sustainable, for you to draw your own conclusions.
Okay.
I think just one a few seconds. I
Mm,
think the people, the consumer here, they actually want sustainably sourced food. Then
mm,
obviously, I'm sure that the Singapore Food Agency, they will also look for sustainably sourced food. Okay,
mm.
I think it entirely depends on the demand of the consumer.
Okay. Okay, this is our last question to both of you. As someone who is trying to eat less meat and more fish, both for health and environment purposes, what shopping tips would you recommend?
So I think in general, I think like that's a great first step, I suppose. Well, I don't actually know the answer whether fish and meat, their carbon footprints are similar or better.
Mm,
But in terms of tips itself, I think certification is the first and easiest step that we can do. Second is also looking at where it is from. So I think just a very top level and easy carbon footprint calculation is, the further it is, it means that it has traveled more
Mm.
miles and henceforth
mm,
required more carbon to get there. So I think that's one. So henceforth, that's why shopping local technically is a very
mhm,
safe choice. Yeah, in terms of carbon footprint itself. And for the other one is just also really understanding how things are being sourced. So there are, like I mentioned just now, fishing methods for fishes. At least they have different fishing styles. Some are purely nets, and some are line caught. So, and also understanding whether they have like sustainability concerns, so such as are they endangered or not. So all this information you can actually gauge from there. So if they are from a reputable farm, or whether they are reputable fishing methods that are not endangered species, then I think it's a safer consumption for in terms of environment. And from there, you also draw understanding about the nutritional contents on how they hunt, what type of food they generally eat, and that often plays a part in the different types of fishes. Is quite apparent in terms of their protein count, their calcium, and omega-3 as well. So ecological understanding and country of origin and sourcing
Mm.
methods.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's very important. I totally agree with what you said. Just I would like to add 2 points. One is, I really appreciate that you would like to. I'm the questioner.
Mm.
You want to move from beef to fish, right? Which is a very smart choice. Beef has a huge ecological footprints, right? And not
Mm.
beef, just meat. But I think fish is very very significant for our health, and so on. So, for example, in 1 kilograms of $1 of meat in India, cost around $9 of ecological capital. So it's not sustainable at all. In case of fish, I think Kenny is very right, and he mentioned everything. Sometimes we love salmon, for example, right? But two things here are here. Of course, it is very delicious, very important for our body, our health. But one is, it's not locally sourced. It has to come all the
Mm.
way from Norway and so on, right? And it involves a lot of footprint,
Mm.
carbon, food miles, and so on. But at the same time, we know that 1 kilo of salmon actually takes 6 kilos of other fish.
Oh,
So so it's not very much
okay.
sustainable. Yeah. Thank you.
Plus the refrigeration needed
Mm.
just to keep it, fresh. And since it's a temperate fish, that also means a lot
Right.
as
Right.
well.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think certification is a good solution.
Thank
Mm.
you for sharing that. That was very enlightening. I didn't think about like the air miles needed to flow like fly fish. Okay. Unfortunately, that is all the questions that we can answer for today. Thank you to both Kenny and Prof. Saidul for all your sharings and answering all our questions. I think this was very insightful. Yeah, it exceeded my expectations. And if it's anything that I learned today, it's that we have more power than we think. The power of collective action is a thing, and we should all try to strive to protect our environment. Okay. Um, we also have actually a feedback form here that you can fill. To those who are watching now, you can scan the QR code and give us our feedback. It will be very helpful for our future events, especially because the cycle or the quarterly cycle is ending. So we would like to improve our webinar series for the next FY. So please give us your feedback. So we'll just be here for another like 2-3 minutes while you fill that up. And on our left side is links to our socials. So you can follow Pasafish SG on IG. And you can also check out Prof. Saidul's works on academia.edu. He has very fascinating, or if you want to read more about the Islamic ecological paradigm, his paper is there as well. You can read it. Yeah. Okay. So we'll just wait a while, a few minutes.
Thank you, Izati, and so Rima, for hosting
No
us.
Yeah, it's
problem.
really a great pleasure to have here uh, for him.
We're more than happy to have you both here, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for ending off the year of webinars. Okay.
Fish, I really love fish. I mean,
Yeah, we'd love to host you on one of our tour sessions. You can see fish until you're sick of them, just like me.
Are you sick of them, actually, Kenny?
Actually, no, I just am sick of smelling like fish. I
Mm,
always tell people around me, I just perpetually smell like fish now.
okay.
it's okay. I think they'll get used to it, lah. It's okay.
So,
I think they have
so what
actually.
kind of fish you like? It's just the saline water fish, or just freshwater fish? Which
Uh,
one you like most?
Frankly, I am a big preference of
Okay.
saltwater fishes. Just because I'm from the Teochew descent, pomfret is my
Okay.
favorite. How about you, Prof?
I like the freshwater fish. With the fish that the size is smaller.
Ooh.
Okay, okay. Do you have a specific favorite?
uh, I don't know the names of all the fish. I think if you would ask me
Okay,
the
okay.
question at the very beginning, I would not tell them. But I
Oh,
know that I know some of the names from my own language, but perhaps not in
okay.
English or Malay or Chinese.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. We would love to document it, but to be very honest, it's so hard. Just because locally, no one really
Mm.
uses like Tamil or other Indian
right.
languages. So we have been trying to collect them, but not very successfully currently.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so I didn't take my dinner, but I'm going to eat fish now.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
Good
I
enough.
guess we'll end this stream now. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We'll see you in our next one.